Well, good evening and welcome to the March edition of The Edge. As always, I'm your host, Trevor Lewington. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Whether you're coming through Roku TV or Fire TV, Apple TV, YouTube, the website, look, we don't care how you got here. We're just really glad you could join us this evening. Normally, it would be the third Thursday where we're talking to community and business leaders who are having an impact on Southern Alberta and beyond. My guests would normally tell you on that third Thursday about different insights that they have to help you build your business, build your life, or build your community. Thankfully, my guest tonight was willing to accommodate the schedule change, and we're here a little earlier in the month than we would ordinarily be. But Amanda Reaume is my guest this evening, the board chair for Volunteer Alberta. We'll get into what that means, but welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I think the volunteer sector is something that often goes underappreciated, so I'm looking forward to peeling back the onion. But I did notice in the news that the United Nations has defined 2026 as the International Year of the Volunteer. What exactly is that?
It's a big year.
Okay.
You're right to recognize that. It's big for the nonprofit sector and for volunteers. So I think there are three main things that is going to and is in the process of accomplishing for us. One is highlighting volunteers because, as you said in your opening, we don't think of volunteerism maybe often enough in our day-to-day life and how it's impacting us. So
and now there's a year dedicated to it.
Yeah.
So tell me more, right?
Let's think about it.
Catches people's attention.
Yeah. So it's really letting us talk about what volunteerism means. It's giving us a greater platform to do some storytelling too about great experiences we've had as volunteers or being served by volunteers. Another thing I think it's doing really is calling attention to the fact of the lack of structure and sustainability that is built around the volunteerism sector.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of volunteer, you think of the word free, right?
Slave labor, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll call it that.
Sorry, was that my outside voice?
Okay.
Volunteer, yeah, but I mean, a lot of organizations, whether it's kids clubs or hospitals, rely on essentially free labor to get things done through volunteers.
But
so
it's not free to run.
That's where we go, right?
It's not free to run, right? So if we want it to be done, if we want it to be done at all, but if we want it to be done safely, effectively, have people have good experiences while they're volunteering, that takes a structure and an ecosystem to be built around it. And that's really something that is, I would say, lacking globally, which is why the UN is raising a flag.
Okay.
And certainly I can tell you that is the case in Canada. And so we are feeling very fortunate that we have this platform this year and using it to the best ability that we can. So it is accomplishing a lot for us to have this platform. So there was a third reason that I wanted to bring up of what it's doing for us, but it's left me and I'm going to come back to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, the UN is helping provide awareness to the volunteer world, what it looks like, getting people some insights, hopefully prompting people to ask some questions. I think that's pretty fantastic. Now, you're the board chair, so a volunteer role in and of itself to provide governance and oversight to Volunteer Alberta. And based on what you just said about ecosystems and doing things right, I would imagine Volunteer Alberta helps put some structure to volunteers. Can you talk a little bit about what Volunteer Alberta is and what it does?
That's what Volunteer Alberta is here to support the voluntary system within our province.
Okay.
And so we do maybe what you think we do. We support volunteer centers that exist throughout the province. So Volunteer Alberta isn't going to be the one that is going to match you with your next greatest opportunity. They're going to say, hey, you live in Lethbridge, check out Volunteer Lethbridge and see the opportunities that they're promoting. So we are supporting and promoting volunteer centers across the province. I would say that's the number one thing that we're doing. In that supporting of volunteer centers, we're trying to give them internal strength as well to be as strong as they can be for volunteers that are coming. So we do training on things that will, again, provide stability to their organization. So it could be on board governance. It could be on what volunteer screening means. It could be on how to recognize your volunteers and keep them engaged.
So those are all like programs that Volunteer Alberta makes available to different volunteer centers to pull down, create.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the backbone support for volunteer centers. I think what maybe isn't so well understood is that I don't think provincial volunteer centers started out with a mandate to have to advocate for volunteerism and for the nonprofit sector, but we are now put in that position. And so Volunteer Alberta does a lot to nourish ecosystems really to be supportive of volunteerism. So an example of that is, again, how do you run a volunteer program when there's not infrastructure to pay a volunteer manager? So we're advocating for proper supports for organizations to keep an organization running with the lights on. What we really have trouble with is that lack of structure around a nonprofit organization that supports the volunteerism ecosystem. So we have to be the ones that are advocating to government to say, hey, don't just fund the program. We need to keep the lights on. We have overhead, and there's a huge overhead problem. That's a swear word to a lot of funders, and that's something that we are trying to change. So just giving you some examples of some of the things that we do behind the scenes to try to advocate and support the nonprofit sector. Another thing that I'm really proud of that Volunteer Alberta is engaged in right now, and we just got another piece of funding.
Yay.
To keep this research going is what a pension program could look for nonprofit voluntary sector in the province.
Okay.
So I can tell you I have no pension. So
having been in the social sector,
I'm gonna
your
be
whole
living
career?
pretty, slim in my retirement, and we make those choices because we're passionate about what we do. But there needs to be an advocate for proper funding for us to support the system of volunteerism. So there's all these pieces of work that go around supporting volunteers themselves and supporting those that support volunteers.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because we often think of as volunteers, they're not employees, but things like, I don't know, WCB and occupational health and safety often have no different requirements for a volunteer. And so is an organization, not that an organization would skirt the rules, but they sometimes don't think in the same context. These rules still apply.
Yes, they do.
Right? And you need to do training and have people that are demonstrate competency,
rights,
all of the things.
All of the things. And so, and screening. So think about a volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters, for example, or somebody in a nursing home where you are, have access and the ability to build a relationship with a person that's
potentially
vulnerable.
Yeah.
That we want those checks and balances to be in place, and so we're here as an organization, as a system to help people understand that, right? You just can't put a shingle out and say, I'm looking for volunteers. There's a system behind it. Hey, and you also want to keep them. So
weird. Once you've got them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, it's like onboarding an employee. It's expensive. It's an investment, and you want it to be a positive relationship.
No, for sure. Yeah. Well, and to your point, the advocacy piece, I mean, I think about most organizations are likely struggling just managing recruiting volunteers and all the complexity. So thank goodness Volunteer Alberta provides the back end support, because that's hard enough. But then, as I've experienced myself, government grants almost never contain an administration portion.
They don't.
And, one of my former colleagues was fond of saying, so you want me to offer this program in a field on a table. Like, there's no facility or there's no support to and I was like, well, that's an interesting analogy, but that's often how grants or government funding is written. True. We're paying you to deliver the program. Great. Someone still has to deliver the thing.
Yes, there's a person behind it. And I think that's a great analogy of delivering it in an open field. But if you think about a food bank too, or a soup kitchen, if we're counting just bowls served of a soup, for lunch, does it matter if it costs 99 cents or $3 to deliver that bowl of soup? It does matter, because one is going to be nutritious and one is going to be broth, right? And so we have to start thinking more about what the outcomes are, like that we want a healthier society, and that we want, if the purpose of a soup kitchen is to keep people healthy and contributing members of society, then it matters, and we shouldn't be measuring the cost of that bowl of soup or measuring the impact of that bowl of soup based on the cost. So
yeah, we're too focused on the inputs and even activity. That's where most measurement happens, but we forget about the actual outcome and the impact. Did it make a difference?
That's exactly
is what we should be focused on.
And that in addition to my role as the current chair of Volunteer Alberta, that I'm the previous executive director of Volunteer Lethbridge, which is nice experience to draw upon in the role.
Go ahead. Handy point of reference. Yeah.
Handy point of reference. So I can tell you as an executive director of the Volunteer Center or of other nonprofits that I've worked for, that way too much time of my time was spent worrying about writing that grant, you know, that might have be a year-long, 18-month-long project-based, don't include overhead. And I was just saying this to you before we started talking, like just laying in bed at night at 3 a.m. wondering about how to make payroll when it's the program that is being funded for a short time and nothing else that is, you know, used to support the volunteer and human resource activity that's going into the delivery.
Yeah, because I mean, I think, you know, even my time as an elected official, everybody talks about stable and predictable funding.
Yes.
Which in Trevor's brain is more than 12 months.
It's more than 12 months.
Like, you know, even if you could get to 24 or 36 months, at least that gives me some runway, and I know that my program is alive for a period of time as I look for the next thing, right?
Heartbreak when you have poured yourself into a program. And this has happened to me a couple of times, and just incredulous that I can't find funding to keep it going because it's proving the outcomes that it was meant to prove, but everybody wants the new shiny thing. And so, you know, back to volunteerism though, thank goodness for the volunteers that are stepping forward to participate in those projects for, you know, as long as they,
for whatever period of time they can.
You know, I think the last one that broke my heart with Volunteer Lethbridge was we had during COVID a program that did friendly calls to seniors that was meant to reduce isolation. So it reduced isolation for both parties. It was the volunteer making the call and the senior receiving it, and you know, friendships developed. And like, I have goosebumps right now even remembering this program, and it broke my heart that we couldn't find a funder to continue it, because those volunteers lost out to keep going on something that they felt very passionate about. I mean, they could continue on in their friendship if they so chose, but no more recruitment. And I still go into doctors' offices and see, be a volunteer for, you know, this age friendly phone call, and I'm like, I know it's not there anymore, and it's just a heartbreaker, you know. But
yeah, because you no doubt heard lots of success stories, and I would imagine seniors who are like, no, this was such a big change for me, it kept me, and then you yank the funding out, and it all falls away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something, if I can.
Of course.
That just happened to me this week.
Okay.
So I have been waiting for the right time in my life for a number of years to be a volunteer for Lethbridge Family Services, Immigrant Services, to be I hate the word in this context, but a mentor to a new immigrant or a refugee. Help them understand what it means to live in Lethbridge, help learn English, all of those things.
Here's how you buy groceries. Here's how you cook some of this stuff.
Exactly.
Like, right? All the things, the daily life stuff.
Things. And like when I feel how vulnerable I would be in going to another country, I would really appreciate that. But I knew it had to be the right time, because that's a big commitment, right? And so just over the past couple of months, I've been screened and onboarded to be a mentor.
Nice.
And yes, but wait.
Okay. There's a catch.
There's a catch. There's beauty there. I don't want to be negative, but I have been matched with my mentee for about 10 days, and it's going beautifully. And I just got an email last night that the program funding was cut and it will no longer be continuing. So my mentee and I are going to continue in a friendship, but it is no longer going to be able to be supported by the organization. And all of the things that she's learning from that organization about how to live in Lethbridge are gone. And so, I mean, I'm almost a little bit tearful even talking about it. So grateful that I was matched a week in advance.
At least you got
I'm
under the wire.
I'm in. But I mean, that's a heartbreaker, but you think about the jobs that are attached to that cut in funding as well. So it's impacting the people like me that would take so much joy out of serving in that way. The people that are moving to Canada and need to learn how to be Canadian, and just like you said, the day-to-day functions. But there's a real economic impact there of the jobs that are lost that we're supporting that voluntary program.
So give me a second. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think first and foremost, that new Canadian who we're collectively as a society giving a hard time to because they don't fit in, they maybe don't speak English that well, they're slower at the cash register, they're fumbling through coins because they don't understand our like whatever
Yes.
whatever the things are.
Yeah.
And so one of the key supports that's in place to prevent that and help them is being taken away.
And just
like stroke of the pen.
Stroke of the pen. And you might remember it's within the last year that the same thing happened to SEPA, a program that helps those self advocates participate in community. It was, don't quote me, but like a six week notice period of cancellation of funding. So there you have people that were volunteering to support self advocates to participate in the community, and helping those self advocates also to volunteer. So double whammy to a loss of the sector, plus the economic impact of the employees that were supporting the program. So this is not a unique story that, came to me last night. It's happening all over the country.
Yeah, and pardon me if we go on a bit of a rant here, but as a former economic developer for Economic Development Lethbridge, and sort of that's similar to my role now, we don't often talk about the economic impact of the sector, and yet, if you take all of those volunteer hours, and even if you just applied minimum wage, because the work has value and it's driving outcomes, it's billions of dollars every year that the sector creates.
With a B, just to highlight that, billion.
With B with an underline.
Yes.
And yet it's relatively few pennies that actually underwrites and supports these programs. So the return on investment is massive when you think about the economic impact versus the government funding required to support the program, right?
You're so right. And it's difficult for me to talk about Lethbridge specifically in this context because of the way that Stats Canada collects information. It's
murky.
It's murky.
We'll just go with that.
Yes, thank you. So to say what's actually happening within our postal codes is a bit tricky. So I can talk though from a federal perspective that we are talking about the nonprofit voluntary sector at 8% contribution to GDP. So that is nothing to shake a stick at. And so when programs are cut or canceled, it is tremendously short-sighted to GDP. So, I often think, when people think volunteerism, and sometimes, even the logos that you see or the imagery that you see is shaking hands and hearts and hugs and all of those things, which are great. And I've got the feels for this, so I don't disagree with any of that.
We're okay with the imagery, yeah.
Okay, but if there are members of any community that don't have the mindset of that or understand the softness or the impact that has, and even if you just want to look at straight numbers and economics, that's 8% of GDP. So there is a huge economic case to be made for the nonprofit voluntary sector and for volunteers themselves.
But, and I think most people understand that, if you had a kid in hockey or gymnastics and you volunteered for the association, you think about the time and money coaches put in, or that you as parents put in at bake sales. And if you had to pay staff to do that, the cost of what that, I think people can very quickly understand the economics, but we never talk about it that way.
We don't. And those programs just would cease to exist. Yeah. And so, remind me to say some positive things during the interview, but I do want to say that 8 out of 10 Canadians surveyed say that they understand the importance of volunteers in the social safety net of our community. And so when I say social safety net, it's easy to think about things like food banks or shelters and things like that.
Well, Lethbridge Family Services, clearly in that space.
We have art, we have, dramatic arts, we have sport, we have, all of the things that make our lives livable depend on volunteerism. So let me go back to say 8 out of 10 Canadians recognize that volunteerism is important to the functioning of Canada. But only 40% of those people can identify for themselves or someone in their life who has been affected by a volunteer. And I find that really shocking because I think about the number of times that I've been affected by a volunteer this week.
Like it's countless.
It's countless. Like
right?
the person that led me to visit a friend in the hospital, so I didn't have to like it could be like even that simple.
White hats
like,
in the airport.
Oh my goodness,
they're
everywhere.
Right, but
yeah,
there's all of these different examples.
Yes,
and only 4 in 10 Canadians can identify that they've been impacted or someone's been impacted by volunteerism.
They can't put their finger on it. So when you said at the outset of this interview that we're not talking about it enough, I can't agree with you more because our lives literally depend on it. I have 4 children, 4 healthy, wonderful children, and I contribute a lot of their well-being to sport. My son just lost his finals on Wednesday night to Medicine Hat, and there was some tears attached to it. But
emotional devastation.
There was a little bit there, but those coaches are not getting paid, and my son is thriving to have that healthy activity to experience outside of what's happening academically
and so, discipline and leadership skills and all the things that come packaged with it.
Now
right?
that I have adult children, I'm like, yeah, I see you volunteer. I see what you did. Yeah. So we're not talking about it enough.
So I mean, one of the questions I have is, and this is purely anecdotal on my part, my observation is that people are very busy with life, and sometimes we're busy for the sake of being busy. But it seems like when you talk to organizations or you see, it is very hard to recruit volunteers. That there's less and less people giving of their time. I assume true. That's true. Okay,
it's true.
Now, is that an excuse, or are people truly busy, or do you attribute it more to this people not understanding the impact, not having the visibility on the sector? Like, do we understand? Is there any research that shows what's driving this decline?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
And it's so multifaceted, just like everything.
Of course.
Right?
Nothing's simple, right?
So, how do I have this conversation without using the word COVID, even though I'm sick to death of it? No pun intended.
Well,
okay.
and I think we're all sick of talking about it because it's 2026 for crying out loud, right?
But we have not recovered.
Okay.
So there is there's a lot of things happening here in terms of the decline of volunteerism. So one is that we haven't recovered from the pandemic and our adjusted lifestyle of isolation, and as a result, we have a pandemic of loneliness now on our hands that is becoming, thank goodness, I'll say positively, more and more recognized. And volunteerism is a huge answer to that problem. Okay. So there's that aspect to it. But I think what you were also alluding to is what's happening just globally, the geopolitical climate, the financial circumstances that we're in. Volunteering has become a bit of a luxury, which is so very sad, right? When I think about the number of people that I know that, myself included, I work more than one job, that need to working one job and having really, air quotes, but luxury of giving your time where it fills your soul, fills your bucket, gives you purpose. We have less and less time for that.
Because my mortgages and groceries are sort of taking priority. I mean, that's the reality.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so there's good economic reason why there's a drop in volunteerism as well. And then I think you add to it just the general fatigue that we're feeling, and overwhelm of everything that's happening around us that is just incessant. I can't even turn on the TV or the radio some days, right? Because I'm just like, I can't hear one more thing. And so then I think about how do I contribute and fill my bucket by doing something that would feels overwhelming. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening here. One of the biggest things, post-COVID, is that seniors, which is a huge demographic, so you can talk about early, middle, or older seniors, but they just haven't come back to volunteerism post-pandemic, and that accounts for a huge portion of the drop in volunteerism. In the last 5 years, we are down 11% in the number of Canadians that are volunteering. And again, I would love to give you Lethbridge numbers, but it's just harder to do that.
But the trend is probably
yeah. So 11%.
That's massive.
It's huge, and it's largely contributed to seniors, but we could talk about youth too. Youth are not starting out their careers and their early adult life in the same way that we did, right? There's different pressures. They've come out of different experiences than we did.
Very true.
And it's harder for them to get involved. So we need to start thinking about volunteerism a little bit differently as well, and how we engage with people. So let me say though, just when we're talking about numbers, that 11% drop is the equivalent of 42,000 jobs at a living wage. So you've just sucked out 42,000 full-time equivalent jobs from communities across Canada with that decline in volunteerism. So again, I want to talk about the emotional pieces about volunteerism, but also talk about, you know, the actual impact to our experience in our.
If we deleted an industry tomorrow that had 42,000 employees coast to coast, there would be some alarm bells.
We'd be talking about it. Right?
It would be Stats Canada would change whatever measure they had to get the government's attention, right?
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to be a little bit positive here too. Where we are seeing an uptick is on episodic volunteerism.
Okay.
So we are a bit less likely as a society right now to make a long-term commitment. Again, even when I was wanting to do this mentoring with Lethbridge Family Services, it took me a couple of years to make that decision. It's a big decision. And so where people are going now is like, what can I do this weekend? What can I do in the foreseeable future where, you know, something could come up a month from now and I'm not overly committed? So we are seeing an uptick in
Okay.
And I think that's important to recognize for volunteer managers as well, is we are likely not going to affect right now the geopolitical system and the economy and all of that in such a way that, you know, in, you know, the next year or two, we're going to see all of these volunteers return to the workplace and these challenges that we're facing right now disappear. So what do we do as volunteer managers and organizations that need volunteers to run and to keep going? I don't have answers for you, except for to say, I think that there's an onus on us to adapt, because this isn't going to change over here today.
Yeah, recognize there was a structural shift in the economy and people's attitudes. This has happened.
Yes.
So what you did before isn't going to work moving forward. So at least know that.
And
work backwards from there.
Okay. So there are, you know, things that people are trying where, you know, drop in and volunteer. I know that there are food banks. I can't recall if Lethbridge is one of them, but just from my role in Volunteer Alberta, where you drop it and help where you can. And I mean, that's even one step away from episodic volunteering. It's where you show up and help where you can.
Right.
And it feels like a bite-sized piece. And also I would say is, as a volunteer, like, as a potential volunteer, somebody who's thinking about volunteering, to think about, again, what would fill your bucket, but like, what would be easy for you to do, right? Like if you like to play guitar, maybe it's an hour a month at the View, or another, you know, at the hospital playing the piano or whatever it is, but it's a bite-sized piece to let you remember that, you know, we like participating and we like being involved, and we are getting as much out of it as volunteers as those that we are serving are getting out of it. So there's some shifts I think we have to make on the other side of things to adapt to things that are completely out of our control right now.
So, I mean, I would imagine that, you know, Volunteer Alberta and in turn Volunteer Canada have seen some best practices. Like, you know, if we're talking to organizations that are running volunteer programs, any other thoughts or advice you would offer them in terms of how to adapt to this shift, or how to, I mean, flexibility. I mean, we heard that in the workplace, right? That people are not looking for, they want flexibility of location and work schedules. So
why wouldn't we want it in our spare time?
Naturally, you'd want that. So, you know, I think there's some parallels there, but are we seeing anything else that's trending or that's, like, you know, being piloted that other organizations could maybe learn from?
Well, let me tell you from two perspectives. So, in my role as volunteer, the board chair of Volunteer Alberta, what Volunteer Alberta has such a proficiency in, I would say, nationally, is the volunteer screening process. And so we talked earlier about, how important it is to properly screen to the level of, vulnerability.
And it's a pile of work.
It's a pile of work, and we're screening out. So some boards of directors, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well, we're so worried about liability and things that could go wrong that we throw everything but the kitchen sink into getting people into the organization in terms of owners interviews or police information check or vulnerable sector checks, etc. Right. So we need to be very cautious as volunteer managers about screening people in and not screening them out. So don't overscreen. As a board member of Volunteer Alberta, I will never be in the position of dealing with a member of a vulnerable population, and as such, I did not complete a vulnerable sector check.
Yeah, because it's a provincial support organization. You're just never interacting with front lines, so that shouldn't be a checkbox.
It shouldn't be, and so Volunteer Alberta really excels at and is recognized for teaching that, and showing people when they're screening in and screening out. I think the other part of that too, and going back to the first question about the United Nations and why they care so much about the International Year of the Volunteer, is that we need to be recognizing that we are disproportionately screening out certain demographics and psychographics of our population. So there can be inherent discrimination built into volunteer screening and intake that, you wouldn't do it purposefully.
You're not really thinking about it.
We're not
right?
thinking about it, but we need to be aware of it. And so there are great movements happening to take a hard look at that, about where we're screening out, where it isn't necessary. It isn't necessary at all. So even the use of the word volunteerism, not every community uses that word. So I could say that in my experience at Volunteer Lethbridge, where we were able to keep more statistics locally about what is and was happening within our community, less than 7% of the volunteers that we placed were Indigenous. And we live on the edge of, is it the biggest or the second biggest?
The largest by both population and landmass, yeah.
And yet less than 7% of those that we put in a formal volunteer placement identified as Indigenous. So something's wrong, something's broken. And so when we look at, or New Canadians, for instance, is another example where they might not use the word volunteering or don't understand the concept. I was giving a presentation once, to a group of New Canadians, and I said, how many of you volunteer? And it was a ridiculously low number of people that raised their hands. And I said, come on, you guys, that's not true. How many of you made a meal or shoveled a walk or babysat so that your friends could go on a date or to a support group or to whatever it was that they needed to do?
All the hands go up.
We all do. So, there's formal and informal volunteering. Should we even call it that anymore? Is that a colonial word that isn't landing with people? So when we talk about community engagement or helping neighbors and those sorts of things, it's so much easier to see what's actually happening than if we say, what are the statistics on volunteering?
Okay. Interesting.
So when you also asked about Volunteer Canada, so good stuff that's coming out, right, is so Volunteer Alberta absolutely leading the charge on trying to reduce barriers for participation. Something that's really exciting, and I am a current employee of Volunteer Canada, is that for the first time really in my lifetime, we are going to have a national volunteer action strategy. So
you say the first time we've had a national strategy?
I was in elementary school, I think, the last time that, and I'm not 20 anymore. I don't know if it shows, but it's been decades. And so Volunteer Canada is taking a lead right now on creating a national volunteer action strategy. And you know, as a person that, you know, does business in the community and has for years, you would never open a business without a strategy. So
like you would hope, right?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you do, it might not work that well,
right?
And so there's a piece in there too where we're recognizing that in order to fix some of these structural issues that we're having and things that are keeping people away from either joining or returning to the nonprofit voluntary sector, is a lack of strategy of how to make that happen. And so I don't know if they would want me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I would say it's about 80% finished. We're very close to the finish line. I would expect a launch in this International Year of the Volunteer sometime this summer. That has allowed the organization to collect voices from all across the country, from the nonprofit voluntary sector and volunteers themselves, about what's working and what isn't. We've collated that into a theory of change or a strategy so that we can move forward purposefully. So that is something that is just so tremendously positive. And there is great excitement from those that are aware that it's happening across the country, that we'll have something to hold on to. We'll have something to show the federal and provincial governments and, you know, volunteer centers across the country that are struggling to keep their doors open. So there is hope. There's hope that, yeah, we're not going to change everything, but we're going to do what's in our power to move ahead and to adapt to where we're at right now.
Well, to your point, you know, you wouldn't open a business, you wouldn't. Even your own family typically has a vision for where you want to be next year or 2 years from now.
Yes.
We have a whole sector, a very large, probably the largest sector of the economy.
Yes. That
there's no structure, there's no government focus or policy that's, you know, consistently and directly applied. That seems like a massive gap and a massive opportunity.
It's a massive gap and it's a massive opportunity. And it's going to be easy, Trevor, to look at that plan when it's released and say, well, there's a lot that's not working, and be overwhelmed by it. But I think how we feel as an organization, and many people that have been involved in the crafting of this strategy, is to say, hey, but you can't fix something until it's identified. And so we're identifying what isn't working so that we can make presentations to the appropriate parties and try to move forward in a positive way.
And now we've got a roadmap. I mean, we at least now have a destination and a strategy to get there, and
yes,
away we go.
Exactly. Yes. And we're not feeling like we're alone in it. Because I can tell you that and I'm sure it's not just my experience, but I'm going to say from my experience, being an executive director of a nonprofit organization can be a very lonely experience, because who can you talk to about, you know, the 3 a.m. making payroll challenges, or that you can't get volunteers in the door, or that you can't keep the volunteers that you have, or the and is that now more than ever we know that we're speaking with a collective voice, and that we are sharing common experiences, which I think will allow us to keep you know, a hold on maybe a bit longer than if we feel like we're these isolated, you know, organizations that are struggling out there in the community. So there's a good reason for hope around just knowing we're on the same page too.
Yeah, and I would imagine, as the former executive director of Volunteer Lethbridge, when you're in Lethbridge and you're in that 3 a.m. bubble and you're going through your inventory of all the problems and challenges, it's not like you're talking to your colleague in Edmonton or Red Deer or Grand Prairie necessarily, if they even exist.
Yes.
And you're certainly not matching that against trends you're seeing in Ontario and the Maritimes, and then...
That's exactly right. I mean, there are regional differences, of course. There's going to be, but the more connected we are, the stronger we are. And so, of course, it's going to be about advocacy. It's going to be about sharing statistics. It's going to be about speaking with shared language. You know, I know you and I have experience together with Team Lethbridge, right? Where, and from an economic development perspective, we would get on a bus, literally, as leaders in Lethbridge.
Me and 50 of my closest friends.
50 of your closest friends, and head to the legislature and have conversations with doors to government, various ministries or their offices.
Right.
One of the major problems that we have as a nonprofit voluntary sector is that we don't have a door to government. And so when we did the same thing, nonprofit day on the legislature, or when we try to do it federally, who are we talking to? So even having a plan to show government to say we need a door to government, so that, because how many ministries does a senior center touch? It's more than one. So there's 4 meetings of offices that are not coordinating and don't speak to each other and don't co-fund. And so that's a your problem sort of thing. And we're like, well, it has to learn somewhere, right? So there's just so much reason to hope too around the work around advocacy that's I think gaining momentum.
Yeah, we never thought of that. I mean, obviously economic development touches multiple ministries, but at least there is a ministry of economic development, like there's trade and tourism, like there's a department that's assigned
exactly
to
right. That's exactly right.
I have a human to call.
Yes, that's
Whereas,
exactly right.
Yeah, when you're in the volunteer non-for-profit sector, you're essentially interacting with everybody. So that's not a strategy.
And it's so easy to say that someone else's, and so we've got good reason to be hopeful about where we're going in the future.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to Lethbridge a little bit, I mean, you spent, was it 5 years as the executive director of Volunteer Lethbridge? Lethbridge, a number of different national rankings had us as one of the top 1 or 2 most philanthropic communities in terms of giving and volunteer hours. Is that still the case? Do you think that was unique to Lethbridge? Like, why did Lethbridge stand out on those rankings, do you think? What made us different?
I have an answer.
Okay.
It's not going to be the only answer. Lethbridge is a very religious community. Lethbridge and area is a very religious community. And when you think about the volunteerism that happens through religious activity and also giving that is attached to religious activity, huge impact. And so that is one reason why I think Lethbridge may have, had a bit of an edge in terms of the number of people volunteering and giving. But back to our conversation before about why volunteerism across the nation is down. Religious affiliation and
participation is
right. down, and so that's not a coincidence. So there's a lot of things at play here.
Okay.
When I was the executive director here, of course, like we said, with statistics, I had to extrapolate that. I was saying at that time that 57% of Lethbridge residents identified as volunteering. Now, of course, there's the inherent, language problems and biases that we've already discussed that are baked into that. But the national average right now is down to 31% on volunteering and giving. So I think Lethbridge is doing okay. But I'm not sure that the average nonprofit across the community, if you would ask, do you have enough volunteers?
Probably don't feel that way.
They're not going to say they've ever got enough volunteers.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing a trend down. It's tight. It's very complex. It's tied to a lot of things. We are seeing many not-for-profits and across our community struggling to function, and government cuts obviously don't help that for the most part.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's government cuts in programming in general, to be sure. But I would also say that the nonprofit voluntary sector, so my volunteer manager peers and I, haven't done a great job in communicating the value of volunteer managers and the need for them. And we kind of touched on that at the beginning of this conversation, but I think that's part of it. And so not only are programs being cut, but specifically volunteer managers.
Okay.
And so I would say, I can't give you a number for this one, but most nonprofit organizations are, volunteerism is dangling off the side of some, volunteer management, is dangling off the side of somebody's desk rather than having dedicated volunteer managers like were more prominent like a decade ago. So the issue is funding, to be sure, but there's also a communication issue there in terms of the value of a volunteer manager.
Helping people understand.
Yeah.
You got to have the right infrastructure and supports in place
Yes.
to deliver the value
Yes.
you need.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, and
Okay.
equating it to what those jobs are and all those things that we've talked about. So there is some onus on us too, which I think the National Volunteer Strategy is going to lay bare, to do a better job of communicating the value of even that particular role, never mind its, the grander functions of a nonprofit in society.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point, you talked about how there's some common language, and even if we can agree on common definitions for things,
Right.
that would help.
That would
so
help.
we all know what we're talking about.
That
right?
would help.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, on a positive note too, getting back to that informal volunteering, that is happening. And I wanna specifically bring up just like a huge opportunity in Lethbridge, but provincially and nationally, neighborhood associations. Like to talk about like some fruit that is just ripe for the picking is there are neighborhood associations in this community that are so very strong. London Road comes to mind. Gary Station, excuse me. There are, I think, between 40 and 50 neighborhood associations in Lethbridge, some stronger than others. But what a grassroots way to get involved that is, it's very personal, it's informal, it's difficult to capture in a statistic, but we need it to happen.
And it's directly affecting the neighborhood in which you live, literally.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. So instead of backing into our or going into our garages that in the back, or parking on the street and running as quickly as we can into our homes.
I can't see you. La, 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 la.
I know, exactly. Please don't ask me for anything. Yeah, it's there's a lot of low hanging fruit for us to build on successes that are already happening. So
nice.
Yeah. So it's not all a bad news story. There are some real opportunities here, but just to do things in a different way.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of shift more to you now. So how did you get involved in the sector? Because, the 3M laying in bed, worried about payroll doesn't sound like a fun vocation. Like you're not selling the career opportunity here. So you've spent, I think, almost 20 years in one form or another in this social sector in the not-for-profit world. So how did you get involved? What keeps you involved in this space?
I like the question. I think
I'm declining to answer.
Moving on. No, I'm just kidding. I think like a lot of us, we fall into things.
Okay.
And life unfolds. And so I'm not sure if you know that my first real job out of university was general manager of Nikayuko Japanese Garden. And I was a fourth year university student, and I started in a summer placement, and the executive director at that time was only meant to take a short-term leave, and gave me the confidence I needed to fill in while she was.
She'd be like, "I'll be right back.
I'll be right. Just hold this for a minute." And the writing's on the wall in the story, right? That she did not return, and the board had the confidence in quite a young person to carry on with that, and it's hard not to fall in love with purpose.
Okay.
So, being the executive director of a volunteer center is very different than being the executive director of a tourism organization. But they're both nonprofit. I started to learn about governance. I started to learn about, the systems that we're working in, volunteer management. And it's hard not to be passionate about it. I think once you're in, it's really hard. It's
in your blood, right? Like it becomes part of who you are. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, having said that, though, if anybody within the sound of my voice wants to offer me, 6 or 7 figure income, like I'm willing to live with less passion and give my passion in my volunteer jobs.
Fair enough.
But it's hard to get out because it's such a community.
Okay. We get quite a few students from both of our post-secondaries that often watch the show. So I'm curious if you have any advice to them about getting involved in volunteering and how it might benefit them, and what should they be doing?
They should be volunteering.
I mean, I agree.
Yes, yes. And I think that there's a lot of ways for students to get involved in volunteering. So we could talk about what we've been talking about right now is traditional volunteerism, volunteer center, sort of job posting, picking,
go look at the official roster in the office and pick a
bulletin
thing.
board or whatever. Yes. But I think our post-secondaries are more and more, and because our provincial government also is recognizing more and more the importance of experiential learning for post-secondary,
right,
and work-integrated learning, and all of the other terms that one could sub in for the idea of work-integrated learning as a post-secondary student. So there are ways to get. It's actually, I think the U of L has a stat of like 99% of their graduates have had some sort of experiential volunteerism learning coming out of programming. And I really don't think I'm overstating that point. And so it is becoming more and more baked into a post-secondary pathway. But not everybody goes to post-secondary either, right? And
also true.
And honor for that as well. But there's just no limit to the number of experiences that a person could have volunteering. I think in Lethbridge right now alone, there are probably about 300 open posting for volunteer opportunities that span the limit of really almost anything that someone could be interested in, or create your own volunteer opportunity, which we've talked a little bit about today in terms of informal volunteering. So I've seen so many students obtain a career path because they've stepped into, a volunteer or a community or civic engagement role.
Right.
I'd also, say a really similar thing about New Canadians. The things like how my heart has been warmed about seeing how do you integrate into a new community. I think volunteerism, I would say, is almost the number one way to do it because, you're learning English, you're expanding your network, you're creating a network, you're increased support system.
Often practical experiences in whatever thing.
So all of a sudden your employability, never mind that your purpose is your passions might be ignited, but you're becoming integrated, and the number of, I don't know what the stats are, but from my own personal experience, the people that have benefited economically and integrated into Lethbridge so beautifully by starting out as a volunteer, I cannot overstate. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to get involved.
Is obviously the benefit of hindsight is always powerful, but is there anything you would have done different with your career looking back, or
no,
you feel like everything's
perfect.
been
Yeah.
it's flawless?
It's
okay,
flawless.
It all sort of added, culminated in the right things.
Certainly not flawless, and I think that the benefit of hindsight of being as young as I am, Trevor, is that I would say no.
Okay.
To a lot more, to be honest with you. I think that I'm sort of tired of the phrase imposter syndrome, but the fear of not fitting in, or the fear of not elevating your career quickly enough. Like, I was just tempted to say, I wasn't tempted. I did say, I was so honored to be asked to be involved in anything and everything that I said yes. And that leads to burnout. And so that is something that I think anyone obviously needs. That's very generic advice, but specifically in the nonprofit voluntary sector, when demand for services is only increasing at a time when resources, generally speaking, are decreasing, we are at super high risk for burnout.
So it's okay to say no to things.
It's better sometimes, and I've learned to sit on my hands a little bit more.
Yes. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's a good thing. Okay. The show, building on that theme, the show's called The Edge. So one question I always ask every guest is, how do you maintain balance? Like in your life, how do you find balance between work and play, staying healthy, staying energized? Any routines or things that you do to sort of keep yourself grounded and stay on the path?
I knew this question was coming, and I know that people I know are going to watch this and call baloney if I say something that is.
Well, they don't get an opinion, so
So I have found in my life that, like, what I've done is bitten off way more than I can chew because I'm so enthusiastic and so eager and so want to say yes.
And it's awesome. I'm in.
Burnout, I'm in. And also it's so exciting. And then, doing a bit of a drop off, and having to back out and, really set myself back and not participate for a while. And so I think that, what I'm trying to do now is just recognize a time and a season. And I use that phrase all the time. It's like, it might be your time and your season, and it might not be. And that's okay if it's not your time and your season.
Okay.
And I think, an example of that is saying, like, it took me 2 years to get ready for this big commitment that I, just volunteer commitment that I just made. It took me a while to be, convinced even to be the board chair of Volunteer Alberta. And that was one of those situations where it was like, well, it's you. And it's like, okay, I was ready at the time. But if it's not your time and your season, then I have set myself up for failure in that way before too. And trying now to set myself up for successes and recognizing that my time and my season is really important.
Well, and again, I think being thoughtful and deliberate about, is this opportunity, mentoring a new Canadian, the right fit, the right time? That's not a bad thing to be guarded about that and be very mindful of what can you do effectively.
Oh,
right?
I would feel so awful if I said yes to something like that and then didn't fulfill my obligation to somebody who was really counting on me,
Right.
So I think time in a season is probably something that always fits. But I also will say, I had a board meeting right before I came here for Lethbridge, Alberta, and I said to them, I'm going to be asked this question. What do you think? And we had a conversation about, like, am I in a season right now of trying to sharpen the saw and learn, a new skill set or get involved in new things? And I think I have involved myself in enough new things recently. But the executive director of Volunteer Alberta, one of her biggest phrases is, be curious about that. And so if I say that provincially, be curious, they're like, do you know Mickey? And I'm like, yes, I do, right? It's just...
It's well known that this...
So there's great mentorship from the executive director of that organization to say, like, you don't have to know everything. Just, like, be curious about it and be open-minded. And what a relief it is to not have to know everything.
That's
and
great.
Be curious about it.
I feel so much better already.
Exactly, yeah. So, I think those are the best answers I could give.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
The last hour has absolutely flown by.
Has it been an hour?
We're literally running out of time here, which is crazy to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts you want to share with the audience around volunteerism, around Volunteer Alberta? Any advice? Any last thoughts you just want to share and leave behind?
I think that volunteerism, I've extolled its virtues for an hour, you said. But the one thing I haven't said, I think, is what a contributor to positive mental health is. And so there has to be a time in a season, and it has to be right. But we all need to feel a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging and a sense of, service to community. It really is one of, like, in our hierarchy of needs of food and shelter and water, purpose is in there. And we don't always have the luxury of getting that through our paid employment. Some of us do. Some of us don't. And so volunteerism is just such a positive way to increase one's mental health. And in every volunteer role I've had, I have received as much as the person I've been serving and vice versa. So I would just say, when it's your time and your season, don't be scared and start small.
No, I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I started volunteering for STARS in high school, which was a while ago. And although I'm not actively volunteering with them, I've stayed connected. I stayed in touch with their donor team, help them with some advocacy down here. And it's amazing how that, I fundamentally identify myself as part of that organization and have for decades.
Yes.
And just that connection and the energy that opportunity brought to me. Even now, I look back and go, I'm so glad I did that.
Absolutely. And so even if it's not formal, we know that anyone who's doing something like that, any commitment to even informal civic engagement, involvement in your community gives you that same sense. So just get involved.
Awesome. Amanda,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me
Thank
today.
you.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
That is the episode. We'll see you next month when we'll have another guest here to talk to you about how to add value and build your community, build your life, and build your business. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next month.